Hello and welcome to the Blue Open Studio tutorial video series. The topic of this video will be active objects. And in this video, we will be discussing the various active objects available in Blue Open Studio, and we will demonstrate how to configure these active objects on a screen. When configuring screens in Blue Open Studio, there are 9 different active objects that we can use. The most basic is the text object, and this just displays static text. It cannot have a tag associated with it, it's just strictly a label or caption. Then a text box allows you to input or display data from a tag or static text as well. And this doesn't necessarily have to be string data. This could also be numerical data as well from an integer or real. The button allows you to execute command animation via the customizable layout. And this isn't just how the button looks, this is also what type of command animation to use, be it VB script or built-in script, and how this animation is executed, be it a left click, a right click, a double click, on down, on up. And a push button is similar to the switch lamp in GP Pro EX. This allows you to read or write data to a tag via pre-configured button types. That would be an invert, on down, on up, latched, momentary. And then the checkbox allows you to create interfaces where the users can enable or disable multiple options from a list. And a radio button is similar to a checkbox, only it is intended to allow a user to choose a single option from a list of options. So the checkbox and radio button, when we look at them, they're configured the same way. It's just their intention is different. Then we have the combo box, and this is a drop-down list similar to what you would see on a web page or any other user interface where you have a list of multiple items you can select from. The smart message is like the message display in GP Pro EX. It allows you to display text or an image that can be modified or changed during runtime based on the value of an associated tag. A linked picture allows you to link to an external file, be it a JPEG or bitmap, and easily reuse that image throughout the application. And it also allows you to dynamically change what image is displayed at runtime by changing the file path that the linked picture object is tied to. Now, the linked picture isn't technically an active object, but since it is part of an object that is used during development of a screen, we're going to look at it here. And then the list box gives you the option to configure a list of items that a user can select from. And when a selection is made, it not only retrieves the text or message that is displayed, but also its position in the list. And before we configure this, we'll take a closer look at how a list box is configured and how it handles reading and writing. Under Project Explorer, I'm going to make sure the Graphics tab is selected. I'm going to expand my screens, and I'm going to open the template screen. And with it open, I'm going to come up to the menu, and I'm going to select Save As. Then I'm going to save this as a new screen, and I'm going to call it Active Objects. I'm going to click Save. And once it saves, you see now that the template screen is no longer open, but the active object screen is. And now we can begin configuring some of the active objects. So on the graphics menu, just to the right of the shapes category are the active objects. And we will start with the text. I'm going to come onto the screen, and I will just simply click. And you see that I cannot click and drag. It just puts a cursor on the screen, and I can begin typing. And for this, I'm going to enter in text string, and then hit enter. And now I have my text object. And if I double click, I can come in, I can change the caption, set my alignment, if I want a border around it and what the color would be, and if I want a background, and I can select what font. If I want to change that, I'll show you the text data link in a few seconds. So now I will copy this by holding down the control key and then clicking and dragging. Then I will double click to bring up the properties. And now I will click on the text data link. You see that it now changes the object. It leaves the text I have, and then it adds in 4 pound signs. And now it gives me the option to put in a tag or expression. And this is through the text data link animation. And for this, I'm going to add in a new tag and one of its properties. So I'm going to type in float value dash greater than name. I'm going to format it auto, and I'm going to leave input enable unchecked. And then once I click out of it, it says that that tag does not exist. Would you like to create it? I say yes, and I'm going to make it a real with a scope of local. I'm going to click back to text, and that brings me back to the text object properties. And I'm going to clear out the caption, and I'm just going to enter in pound signs. And what I want to enter in is enough pound signs to cover the tag name float value. So 1, 2. Float value is 10 characters long. I will enter in 10. And the reason we're doing this is because the name property gives us the name of the tag. So if that tag ever changes, as long as it keeps the name property here, it will simply update that with whatever the name is. So I go back to text, and then for caption, I just put in 10 pound signs. And you see that the object, it puts 10 in, but some additional space, and that is because it pads it a little bit because of the type of font that's selected. If I change the font, it will change this as well. And if I go back into text data link, the auto size allows it to resize the text based on the size of the object, but we're going to leave that unchecked. The next will be text box. So I come back into active objects, click on text box. Now I can click and drag and I can resize. If I go into the properties, you see that there are similar properties for this than we saw when we were looking at the text data link. We still have the same at the top with the push pin and the replace hint and the list, but then we now have an option for a tag or expression. So you could do scaling individually per text box instead of having to do it on the tag. For us though, we're simply going to add a new tag in here, and it's going to be text string. When we click out, it says the tag doesn't exist. Would you like to create it? Yes. We'll make the type a string, scope local, click OK. And now we see we have a format of auto. If we drop this list down, we now can select whether we want it to be decimal, hexadecimal, binary. Auto will essentially select the best for this. Typically, it defaults at decimal. Then the input enabled box, this allows you to enable or disable input for this object. I'm going to leave input enabled checked. Then we have the mask or count. So if we were putting a value in here with, say, a decimal place, we could do a pound dot pound, pound, pound. And that would give us a single digit to the left of the decimal place and 3 digits to the right, and that's it. It doesn't round, it simply truncates. Then we can put in a minimum value and a maximum value, which means that with input enabled, it would allow us to enter a value within the range of the minimum and max. So if I put in a minimum value of 0, and a maximum value of 100, I could put 0 to 100. Anything outside of that range, it won't allow me to enter. I'm going to clear these out because I don't need them for a string. Then we have multi-line, which allows us to put multi-line into the text box. I'm going to leave it unchecked. Password, this allows it to mask the characters that you enter in. So this could be used as a password entry field. With the e-sign box checked, it requires you to acknowledge entry into this object. This is used for 21 CFR Part 11 compliancy, and it is tied into the security system as well. Then if we enable multi-line, then we have the scroll bar and word wrap boxes enabled. Scroll bar puts a bar on the right side. Word wrap wraps the words around. And then enable translation is for the text table or multi-language. And require confirmation, this says, are you sure you want to enter this value? And you just say yes or no. This is independent from the security feature. So you can have this configured or enabled without having security enabled. And then RTL is right to left. So most languages that we see, you read left to right. For those that go the opposite direction, you can check this box and then the values are entered in or displayed right to left. In the security field, you put a number in here, and that is the required security level that needs to be logged in order to input data into this field. If you are not logged in at that security level, it prevents you from entering in data. Then the virtual keyboard allows you to select the type of keyboards that you can use. And once we run this to view, we'll go over what those keyboards are. By default, it's set to use default. And by default, the application has pop-up keypads or keyboards or virtual keyboards disabled. So now everything is configured properly. I'll click out of this. And I will resize this because this is slightly too large. Let's bring it a little closer. And then I will copy it. Bring this down to match. And then in this one, I'm going to change the expression from text string to float value. And for the mask, I'm going to put in pound dot pound. This will give me 2 characters to the left and 1 character to the right of the decimal place. And I'll leave input enabled. So now I will save, and I will not close the screen, but I will run the application. And you see that the screen comes up, but nothing else does. What happens is whatever screen is open in development, if you start the runtime, that screen or screens will be displayed when the runtime starts. It's kind of a shortcut for testing the screens that you are currently working on. So you see that the float value is 0 and text string has a blinking cursor. So I'm going to click on this. You see that no keypad comes up, but I can still, using my keyboard, type data in and hit enter. Now for the float value, I can clear that out and I can do 555. And you see that it prevents me from entering in. And that is because I have 3 characters set for the input mask. Although I have 2 to the left of the decimal point and 1 to the right, it is still a total of 3 characters. So if I clear those out and I do 12.3, everything's happy. So now if I come back into development and I stop the runtime, I go into project and then I go to viewer. You see here virtual keyboard. If I check that box, I can also select the default, be it alphanumeric, enhanced keypad, and keypad. We will leave it set at alphanumeric as the default. Click OK. Then I'll come in here. In text string, the default is fine because it's alphanumeric. But for the float value, I don't want to be able to enter characters in. I just want to be able to enter numbers. So I'm going to set that as keypad. Then I will save. Then restart the runtime. Now you see when I click on it, I get the virtual keypad where now I can enter values in. And then I can also, of course, use my keyboard as well. And now we will take a look at the push buttons. And the push buttons are in here for primarily legacy purposes because they're the original button in the software before the button object came out. And they're kept here for legacy purposes so that older applications, when they're migrated to the newer versions, aren't broken or don't lose support for the objects they already have configured. We'll quickly go over how these are set up. So I'll drop a push button down on the screen. When I open the properties, you see similar header across the top of the window. Then we have type and state. And the type we can select what type of button, meaning when we press it, what is the action the button executes? Is it a momentary, maintained, which means it's a toggle, or latch, which means it's a set and then it's reset elsewhere. The tag expression field serves two purposes. You can put a tag in there to receive the right value from the appropriate state, be it opened or closed, when the button is pressed. If you put an expression in there, it will execute that expression on down, meaning when the button is pushed. However, the software will not write the result of any expression. So you are either writing a value to a tag for the appropriate state, be it opened or closed, or assigning a value to a tag when you put an expression in. The config, this allows you to configure the style of the button. If it's a rectangle or a rectangle with indicator, what the effect is, the alignment, the button color itself, the indicator or lamp color, and the caption. And if there's blinking, whether the fonts are, if the text blinks, what the right values are, things like that. So for this one, we're going to set the caption for open to off, and the caption for close to on. And we're simply going to flip these colors, make the open red and the closed a green. And then the right value, this is the value that will write to that tag that you enter into the tag expression field. I'm going to leave that at 0 and at 1. Click OK. And then on the right side, we have the state, which gives us the default state for the push button if it's normally open, which is the default, or normally closed. This is how it starts when the screen opens, not when you press it. So this is its default state, and then when you press the button, it inverts to the other state. Then we have the indicator field, which is like the lamp property in GP Pro EX. You would enter a tag in here to define the indicator that causes the button to change to its specified color when the tag value matches one of the two specified values on the config dialog. If you do not enter a tag or you leave this field blank, the indicator will change colors automatically when you press the button. Then we have a reset, which is only used when latch is selected for the type. So if we leave it at momentary, it is disabled. And now we see something new. We see key down here. We can select a keypad or keyboard shortcut for this button. And we can select any of these predefined special keys, or we can enter in. So for example, an A. If we hit A, it would toggle this button. Then we can also give it whether we want to use Shift, Alt, Control with it. And we can expand it to left or right, left only, right only for all of these. We are just going to leave this blank. And our first push button is configured. So I'm just going to shrink this down. And then I am going to copy this button twice. And then I'm going to set this as a maintained. And for the tag expression, I'm going to put mode. And it'll say it doesn't exist. I'm going to create it, leave it as integer. And then I will come into the third. I will right-click on tag expression and bring up the object finder, and then select mode as well. Only this time for the type, I'm going to set this to latched. And then I'm going to select for the reset field, reset. And once I click away, I'm going to create the tag. And this time I'm going to make the type Boolean. Click OK. And then I'm going to come back up to the top one, because I forgot to put my tag in here. I'm going to enter in mode. So now on the last one, we made it a latched, and we had the reset field. So how this works is it will latch that tag in the tag expression field. And in order to unlatch it, we have to toggle the tag in the reset field. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this off, change this to momentary type, put reset in there, change it back really quick to clear that out. I'm going to go into config, and I am going to change the color to just a dull gray for both, and make the caption reset for both. And I'm going to leave the right values at 0 and at 1 respectively. And I will just resize this. And now I will create one last push button. I will copy the bottom one, open up the properties. I will leave this set at latched. Normally open, tag expression will be mode. Indicator, I'll also put mode in. Then I will go under config, and I will change the style to rectangle with indicator. And everything else I will leave the same. I'll click OK, and now you see that the button has changed shape or changed its layout. And I will just drop this down a little bit so now you can see the button. We have an indicator, and then now we have our label there as well. Bring up the runtime, and now we see there's our momentary, there's our maintained, here's our latched, reset, and here as well. So now we will look at both the checkboxes and radio buttons. So I'll go back into development, and I will stop the runtime. And then I will go to the graphics menu and select checkbox. I will click and drag to create one checkbox, and then go in to the properties. We see that the properties here, we have the same setup across the top. Then we have the field's caption, tag, true value, and disable. The caption field is what will be displayed next to the checkbox itself. Then the tag field is what tag we will enter in to write the value to. And the true value, this is the value when the box is checked. It doesn't have to be 0, 1. It could be anything. It could be 55, -30, a decimal, doesn't matter. And then the disable field, self-explanatory like every other disable field in the application. Then we have the similar setup, fonts, e-sign, require confirmation, security, and then the key settings. And then we have the advanced button, which in here allows us to give a tri-state, which we will look at in a little bit. The feedback field is used for tri-state. So when this tag configured in this field matches the value specified in the tri-state field, the checkbox will display the tri-state or the third state. If this field's left blank, then the third state will be displayed when the tag configured in the tag field matches the value entered into the tri-state field. We'll see this in action in a little bit here. Then we have enable translation, enable focus, which means we can tab focus over to this object, auto format, auto gray out, push like. This allows you to make it a button versus just a box. It still acts like a checkbox, but now there is a button to it as well. This is primarily for touchscreens where a mouse or the precision of a mouse touch may not necessarily be capable. So you make it a little bit larger in order to be able to use the touch or to even see it. Then the force box, with this checked, it does a force to the tag database, meaning that when the box is checked or unchecked, it will force this value to the tag database or force the tag database to see a change in value when this checkbox is activated. Then we have a fill color, and this is for push like when we have that enabled. So when we configure that in a little bit, you will see that in action. For now, I'm just going to leave everything set to default. And we're going to use these checkboxes for the sushi class that we created a few videos ago. So for caption, I'm going to put in nori. For tag, I'm going to enter sushi.nori. True value, I'm going to leave at 1. And then everything else, we'll leave at default. So now I'm going to take this, and I am going to copy it. And then I'm going to change the caption to salmon and change the tag to sushi.salmon. Copy it again. New one will be tuna. The tag will be sushi.tuna. And then copy it one more time and change this one to rice. And then sushi.rice. And now we have our 4 checkboxes, but they seem to be a little too large. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to resize the top one. And I'm going to make it a little more manageable, a little smaller. And now, if I want to make them all match, first I will select all the ones I want to change, and then the very last object I will select is the original, or the one I want them to change to. And then I will come up to the Format menu and this Resize. If I drop this down, I can resize both, or just the width, or just the height. I'm going to click on both, and you see now that all of them match the same dimensions, width and height. It's a quick way to edit your objects without having to go in and change each one. And then we have them set up properly. So what I am going to do is I will add them in to my DB2. The bottom I will put sushi.nori, sushi.salmon, sushi.tuna, and sushi.rice. I will now save, and I will start the runtime. You see I can select them. You see down in the database SPY, when I select or deselect, they toggle between 0 and 1. And I'll go back in, and I will change Nori to a tri-state. So I will go into Advanced. I will enable tri-state and leave the value at 2, and I'll leave the feedback field blank. Then I will click OK. And now when I save, the runtime comes back up. I can click once to check the box, and you see that the value for sushi.nori is 1. If I click a second time, it now enters the third state, which is a square. So a completely filled box, and you see that the value went to 2. If I click a third time, it goes back to the default. Now we will look at radio buttons. And as I mentioned previously, radio buttons and checkboxes are very similar. The only difference is their intent. Where a checkbox is a list of items where you can select multiple items from that list, and radio buttons are intended for a single selection from the list of options. So if I drop a radio button down and I enter in to the object properties, you see that they are very similar. In fact, they're identical. And if I go into Advanced, it's the same setup. The radio button is intended for a different use, but it is able to be configured exactly the same as a checkbox. So you can use a checkbox where a single selection is what's intended, and a radio button where multiple selections are intended. You can use them together, intermix with a combination of checkboxes and radio buttons. It really doesn't matter. It really all depends on how you want to use the objects. So for this, I will change the caption, and we are going to go with a type of speed. So for the first one, I'm going to enter in a caption of fast, and the tag will be speed. It'll ask me to create it. I will select yes. I'll leave it at integer, and I'll set it to local, and I'll click OK. And then for the true value, I will change this to 3. And then in Advanced, I will enable the tri-state, and I will make this 99, and click OK. And now I will copy this once, and then I will select both. Then I will copy both of them and go up, change the caption of the second one to medium, the true value to 2, the third one to slow, the true value to 1, and then the last one will be off, true value of 0. So now I want them all to be the same size as the checkboxes. So I will select all of my radio buttons, and then finally select a checkbox, come up to Format, and click Resize. And now we'll just get them a little closer together just to make it a little easier. And now I will show you the push like. So I will copy fast, open the properties, go into advanced, check on push like, leave the fill color the way that it is. And I will disable tri-state, click OK. I'll just resize this a little bit so we can see it. And now you see that it looks like a push button. However, it'll still act like a radio button. So now I will save and bring up the runtime. And now you see I can select a single option because I have a tag entered in, because I have the same tag entered in for each one. I also have the push button where it simply sets that. However, with this, with the tri-state, now when I hit the tri-state for the radio button, they all become grayed out. That is because in here I have a tri-state of 99. If I put in a -1, I click OK. Now I come here. See that only the fast now is disabled. And that is because of the value that I entered in. Because I have a value of 99, which is greater than the value of any of the other ones, it shows that the other ones are selected because that tri-state value is greater than the others. It's kind of a confusing thing to do. But what I do is if I'm going to use a tri-state, I am going to use typically a value less than any of the other states. And this not only holds true for radio buttons, but for checkboxes as well. I could configure these each with their own tag. So I could use radio buttons over here for the sushi, and I can use checkboxes over here for the speed, and they would still function as intended, where a single item is selectable here, multiple are selected here. So the next active object we will look at will be the combo box. I'll come back into development, and then I will go to graphics, select combo box, draw it on the screen. When I go into the object properties, we see similar layout. The only differences are label and position, then data sources and advanced. So the label is the tag that will receive the text in the combo box that's selected. So for this, we're going to use the same speed setup that we use for the radio buttons above it. And for the label, we're going to enter a new tag in called speed label. Does not exist. Would you like to create it? We'll make it a string, scope as local. And then the position will receive the numerical position in the list. If it's in alphabetical order, this is how it is entered on the list or how it is originally read into the list. And that will make a little more sense when we look at data sources and advanced. So for position, we will just put in speed. Since it already exists, we don't have to create it. The two new checkboxes at the bottom are input enabled, which will allow us to add additional values to the combo box if we want, and then sort. This will sort them by alphabetical order. There is no way to determine how they're sorted. It will sort it in ascending order alphabetically. If we go under advanced, now we have how the combo box looks. Its alignment, its background color, the drop list size, the number of items it displays when the list drops. which is 4. If there's more than this number of items there, it will give you a scroll bar so you can scroll through. And if these are numerical values, how many decimal points do you want to display? The auto format, once again, goes back to how the text box works as well, where it is the number of decimal places according to the virtual table created by the set decimal points function. And then custom, we can enter in any number that we want. I'm going to leave everything at default. And then data sources gives us the source that the items in the combo box are coming from. And we have 4 different options. We have an array tag, static label, text file, or database. For the first one, we're going to leave it set at static labels. And then if I go into settings, I'm going to enter the first one as off, the second as slow, third is medium, and the last one is fast. Click OK. And now we have them set properly. Now we are all set with the combo box. However, we want to be able to see what is selected. So I am going to go down to the database spy, and I am going to enter in speed. And we see that as a -1 because the last thing that we selected was the third state of fast. And then for the label, I am going to place a rectangle just above this. And then in the caption, in curly brackets, I'm going to enter in speed label. Click OK. Now we're all set. I will save, and then I will start the application. When we drop this down, we see our 4 items. When I select off, we see that the speed goes to 0, and our label changes to off. Now if I select slow, see the label changes. Then I can select medium, and we see that not only does the speed change, but also our radio buttons change as well. If I come back in, and I come in and I select sort, and then I save, back in the development, now sorted in ascending alphabetical order. However, if I select fast, you still see the speed goes to 3. It goes by the original position that they are entered in. Since fast was the last one we entered, it is a value of 3 because the list is 0 based. So the very first one will always be 0. Second one will always be 1, and so on. And regardless of whether they are sorted or not, it will always be that positioning that it uses with the value. So now back in development, we will create a second one with a different data source. So I am going to copy this combo box, open the properties. I am going to leave everything else set the same except for the data source. And the type I will set to text file. And field, I will enter in a tag inside of curly brackets. And I will name this tag field. It'll ask if I want to create it. I say yes. I set this as an integer. Scope is local. And I click OK. And then the reload. This will allow us to refresh what data is being displayed. Since we have this set as a other data source besides static labels, the values in any of these data sources could change. So by allowing a reload field, when we toggle the value of the tag entered in here, it will refresh or reload the data from this data source. So for this, I'm simply going to enter in grid reload. And it'll say it does not exist. Would you like to create it? And I'll leave it as an integer, set the scope to local. And then I will go into settings. And in these settings, we have the option for specifying a file in the delimiter. So think of this like how a CSV file is configured. You have multiple values separated by a comma. We can do that in the text file, and we can determine what our delimiter is. We can have the predefined ones, tab, comma, space, semicolon, or we can select an other one, meaning we could put a V in here, an uppercase V, and if the values are separated by an uppercase V, we now have our correct delimiter. And you can select multiple, so you don't necessarily have to have a single one. You can have all of them used. In our case, we're going to leave it at comma. Then we have the option for read only. This trumps the option in the properties of input enabled. So if read only is selected, we will not be able to write values back to this data source. This is really good if you just want to display the values but not be able to write back to them. If I uncheck that, I am now able to write in new values to this data source. Then for the file, we can do one of two things. We can click on the browse here and point to a file, or we could enter it in here. In our case, we are going to type in speed.txt and then click OK. Now that text file, we just entered in the name and the extension, not the path. That's because by default, the application, when it's running, will look in the application directory for these files. So we will have to create that file. So I'll open Windows Explorer and I will go into my training files zip folder. I will find speed.txt. I will copy it and paste it into my training application directory. If I open the file to look at it, you see that I have 4 lines and I have 2 values on each line: off, comma, stop, then slow, comma, turtle, medium, comma, normal, and then fast, comma, rabbit. These are the different fields that can be used. So for example, the off, slow, medium, fast is the first field, or field 0. Stop, turtle, normal, and rabbit are the second field, or field 1. So now I come back in this field tag will allow us to put in the numerical value for whatever field inside of that data source we want to view. So we click OK. Everything is set up the way that we want. I will actually disable sort. Now everything is set up the way that we want. So we'll need to add in a way to change the field. So I will just enter in text. And then I will go into the properties, enable text data link for tag expression, put in field, and enable input. And then I will place a button down on the screen. Go into the properties, and we'll go into the command animation in another video, but really quickly for the caption, I will enter in reload, and this will be the text that displays on the front of the button. I'll leave the style and everything the same. We'll go to command, and then for command animation, on the on down tab, I will change the type from VBScript to toggle tag, and I will type in the tag we're going to use, which is grid reload. And then I will come up and I will save. And then I will start the runtime. And I come over and we see that field is set to 0. With this, we have our off, slow, medium. If I change this to 1 and I click reload, we now see that we have our new column or new field displayed. So we can dynamically change what data is being displayed in the combo box at runtime. If I come back into the development and I come into the combo box and I look at the other data sources, we have an array tag and database. An array tag, under the settings, we just give it the array tag itself and the number of items. And this will be the tag and the starting element. So we don't have to start at the very first element. We could start it partway through the array and just give it a number of items that we want to list. So if there's an array with 100 items and we just want to display the last 10, we could start it at the array element of 91 and number of items at 10. And then if we select database, we now have the field and reload, and the field corresponds to the database column or field that we're going to look at, and the reload serves the same function as it does with the text file. Then for the settings, we have our database configuration window. And we'll see this throughout the application, especially when we start looking at things like the trending and we look at database connectivity. We will go over how this is configured in another video. So now we will look at the smart message display. Come back into development, stop the runtime, and then under graphics, select smart message, draw it on the screen, and then bring up the properties. So the object properties on the message display, we have a type, which we have 3 different options: message display, multi-state indicator, and multi-state push button. The message display type allows you to display one of multiple messages within the single object. Multi-state indicator displays any one of multiple messages and also has the ability to display bitmap images with the messages. And then the multi-state push button allows you to display the message and bitmap image, but also resembles a multi-position switch that allows you to increment through the messages by clicking the object during runtime. So think of this as a multi-selector button. Then we have the value type, which is Boolean, integer, or least significant bit. Boolean provides 2 valid states, either 0 or 1. Integer provides up to 500 valid states. And the least significant bit provides 32 valid states. Basically, it's using a 32-bit integer, and each bit is a single position or state. And it's the least significant bit that is set to a value of 1 that will be displayed. We have our alignment, our switch event. If we had multi-state push button selected, we can do on while, on down, or on up. We're going to leave it set at message display though. Then we have the read or tag expression field. This field is what determines what message is displayed during runtime. The write tag field, which is an option available for the multi-state push button, basically is the value associated with the currently displayed message. So the tag in this field will get that value written to it. Then we have an option to hide the border and what the weight of the border is. Then there is also a checkbox for check expression on each message line. What this does, it allows you to give a unique expression for each message. So instead of using a position or a value for the item on the list, you can do an expression for each message instead. So for our first one here, we are going to put in a tag in the read tag field of status. Doesn't exist, would you like to create it? We say yes, integer and local. We go into messages configuration. We have a data source of static or text file. This allows us to determine what the data source is. If it's static, we enter in all the messages and information here. If it's text file, it is entered into a text file separately and then read in. Then for the columns, the state column is the different lines or different instances or messages that are there. See, the very first one is an error value. What this does is if there is no message assigned for a specific value, it will display whatever is in this error line. So for example, if we have a value of 9 million come in and we don't have a message associated to that, it would display the error line. Then the text message column is the message that is displayed in the smart message object during runtime. Then the value column, this is what the read tag field checks for. it checks for this specific value to determine what message to display. Then we have the format for the foreground and background for the rectangle and the text and whether they blink or not. So to set ours up, for row 0, I'm going to put in message number 1. I'm going to tab over and leave the value at 0. I am going to leave the text foreground and background the same, and the rectangle foreground and background the same, and I am going to enable rectangle blink. I am actually going to copy this and paste it in to row 1 and just change the message and the value. And I will actually uncheck that. But as you can see, I can copy a row and put it into another row. So if there's just 1 or 2 things I need to change, I can. And then for the text, I am going to change this to red. That's the text foreground. Then for row 2, I'll put in message number 3. And then message number 4. And then message number 5. And then for message 4, I'm going to make the text blink. Then we have the enable translation and auto format at the bottom. I click OK. And now our smart message display is all set for us to view. I am actually going to copy this, and I am going to modify the settings. I'm going to make this one a multi-state indicator. And if I go into messages, you see that the messages are the same. I'm going to leave everything as is. Now we have a new group of columns, and that's the graphic file and the transparent color, and if I want to enable transparency. This transparent color tells it what color to make transparent. In this graphic file, we could put in a tag, or we can put in a path to a file. I'm going to leave everything as is, and then copy this one more time. And then I will make this a multi-state push button. And I'll leave it as on down. And my messages will leave the same. You see that I have the same group of columns, including the graphic file. And the value type, right tag, I will leave set as default. Now I will save and start the runtime. If I come down, you see that my messages are displaying and flashing the background color. And I can scroll through each message, and you see that it's independent because I'm scrolling through this individual message display, not any of the ones up here. If I came back in and I set this right tag to status, and I come through, now you can see that even though I'm reading in that value, I can write it back out and I can change the other ones as well. If I come back into development and I come to our original that we created, and now I check this box for check the expression. Now if I go into messages, see that I have a new column in place of the value column called tag/expression. For this, I'm going to enter in an expression. Status equals 1, and then status equals 2, status equals 3, status equals 4, and then finally status equals 5. If I click OK, if I save, I can come back in here, and now I can change it. And you see now it's off by 1 because I'm no longer doing 0 based, I am doing 1 based. Additionally, if I come back in and I uncheck this and I go back into messages, my original values remain. And then of course, if I come back and check that again and go in, my tag expression values remain. So I can toggle back and forth in development if I need to. And also, one last thing, in this value column, you can change these values. For example, message 1 doesn't necessarily have to be 0. This could be 100. This could be 552. This could be 200, and so on. The only thing that you want to do, though, is you want to make sure that you keep the values in ascending order. So lowest at the top, highest at the bottom. My data source, if I select text file, I can now point it to a source file, and this is similar to how the combo box was configured, where we can either browse, put the name in, or put a tag in curly brackets to tell it what file to look at, and it will then pull the information out of that file. And in the help manual, if we search for message display or smart message, we see the source file format section, and it tells us what the column is and what the default values are, and gives us an example of how we need to configure it. Additionally, if we come into static and we configure our messages here, we can simply copy these rows, and then in Notepad, paste them in, and we have the format that we need. The only thing left would be, of course, the error row at the very top. We'll now look at adding a linked picture to the screen. Before we actually add the screen object, we will need to take the images and place them in the application directory. So I'm going to open Windows Explorer. I'm going to go to my training files. And then in here, we have two images, test_off and test_on. I'm going to copy both of those. And then I am going to dump them into my application directory. All right, and then I go back into Blue Open Studio. And then on the graphics ribbon, we see to the right of active objects, data objects, and then to the right of that is libraries, and linked picture is located there. So if we click on linked picture, it comes up with a file browser, and it defaults to the resources subfolder under web. I'm going to click on the BOS_training folder, and I am going to select test_off.png, click open, and I'll paste it on the screen. I'm just going to move it over here so we can get a better look. Now if I double click to open, you see that we have the same header across the dialog, but then we have a link file, and it has /test_off.png. That // tells it that it's the home directory for the app file. We can browse again and select a different location or a different image if we want. Additionally, we can put a tag in here for the file path, for the file name, or even the file extension. All that we would have to do is put that tag into curly brackets. And then if we ever change the image, we can click refresh and it'll re-import the image in. And then below that is transparent color. And there are three options: none, color code, and tracker. So none means there's no color that's set to be transparent. If we select color code, we can either do a tag or expression to tell it what color turn transparent. And typically we would use the RGB color function. And when we get to scripting in another video, we'll show you that. And then there is tracker, where we can select a specific color. If I take this anchor point that's right here in the bottom right, and I drag it over, I can pick what color I want to be transparent. For this, I'm just going to set it to none. And now we will look at the list box. But before we configure it on the screen, I want to quickly go over how the list box works. So the list box object has two tags. It's a read search tag and a write tag. And the read search tag essentially writes the value into the list box for looking for a particular item in the list. And then whenever an item is selected, that item comes out to the write tag. These two tags are not dependent on one another. You can do a write without doing a read search and vice versa. You don't need one to do the other. They can be independent or they can be used together. Okay, back in the development software, I will go up to the graphics menu, select list box, and draw one on a screen. I'll open the properties. We see the same type of header, and then below that we have a value type, which has Boolean, integer, and least significant bit. This works similar to how the smart message handled this value type. So we're going to leave ours set to integer. And then to the right of that, we have messages, which is set up very similar to the smart message, where we have a state, only this time there's no error. There also is no data source, meaning that it's all static messages. And then we have our message column, value, which once again can change. Then just the text foreground and whether the text blinks. And then of course our enable translation and auto format check boxes. So for us, I'm going to first enter in the messages. And the first one is going to be machine stopped. And I'm going to give it a value of 90. Then it will be machine started, value of 91, running, value of 92, e-stop. And now this value, I'm going to give it e-stop. So the value field can be numeric or can be a string. And then jog mode, value of 94. Auto mode, 95, and then finally manual mode, value of 96. And then I am going to change machine stopped, the text foreground to red. And then auto mode, I am going to set the text to blink. Click OK. And you see now that the text has updated the messages inside of the list box. And then we have the fonts configuration. And then we have 4 fields that are configurable. The 2 enables, user and control, correspond to the read search and write tags. So user enable allows you to select through interaction in the GUI an value or an item in the list. And once again, this is an enable field. So if the field evaluates as true, meaning a non-zero value, it will allow you to select a value. If it evaluates as false, then the object is locked out from user intervention or user interaction. The control enable prevents programmatically selecting a value in the list box. And this works the same way as the user enable. True allows you to interact with it. False, it's locked out. Then we have the read search tag, which is the tag you would use to search or read a value inside of the list. And then the write tag value is the tag that would receive the selected value from the list. And below that, we have our navigation of scroll bars. So we have a start, end, a row, and a page. And depending on what you select, you can see that it automatically configures on the object. I'm just going to leave row selected. In list wrap, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, it'll go back up to the top and continue scrolling. I'm going to uncheck that. And then we have below that the E sign and require enter for selection. That means is you can select something, but until you actually hit an enter or carriage return line feed, it will prevent you from making a selection. Then we have the colors for the highlight and text and the background and the border. I'm going to leave all of them as default except for highlight, which I'm going to change to yellow. In the tags for these 4 fields, we're going to use the list class that was created in a previous video. So for user enable, I'm going to right click and select insert tag expression. I'm going to find list on the object finder, go to member, and this will be the user enable Boolean. Make sure I clear that one out of there. And then for control, I will do the same thing. Select list, select control enable. Then for the read search, list, read, which is an integer. And the right will be the list right, which is a string tag. So now we have our 4 tags configured, we have our messages configured, and the layout is the way we want it. So I will first come into database 3, and at the bottom I will enter in these 4 tags so we can monitor them during runtime. So now we have our 4 tags in the database by. Our list box is configured the way we want it. So now I will save. And the runtime comes back up. And we see already that we have the list.write as a value of eStop. So right now, since both the user enable and control enable is 0, I cannot interact. I will snap my runtime to the right. Then I will snap my development to the left. And now if I change user enable to 1, I can now interact. And you see that it gives me the value of the message. So if I bring this back up, come into messages, you see that for eStop, the value is eStop, and that's down in the list.write. If I select machine started, it gives me a value of 91 in the list.write tag. And now using the arrows on my keyboard, I can also navigate as well. You see that when the auto mode is selected, the text will blink. So if I come under list read and I try to enter a value, and let's say 91, it ignores it because control enable is set to 0. If I set this to 1, now you see that it automatically jumps to 91 and it highlights machine started. So then if I enter in a value of E stop, clears that out and it takes me to E stop. And it clears it out because it's an integer and it cannot handle displaying a string. It still passed that value into the list box, but it wasn't able to display it on the read. So if I put a 96 in here, it will keep 96 and then move me over to 96, which equates to manual mode. Last but not least are the buttons active objects. And so what I will do is I will close out of my list box, maximize my development, and on the graphics menu, I will select button, and I will click and drag. Now we quickly set up the reload button for the combo box earlier in this video. Now we're going to take a closer look at how the button active object is laid out. So if I bring up the properties, the first thing we see is the caption dialog. And it has the same header, and then it gives us a caption, and this is the text that we want to enter in here for displaying. We could also not only put static text, but we can put in a tag in curly brackets, similar to how captions are handled in a rectangle. So we're going to create 2 buttons that interact with the list box. So I am going to make this one the user enable toggle button. So for the caption, I'm going to enter in user, then hit enter to add the second line. Then in curly brackets, I'm going to put in list.user enable. And now I have that set. And then below that, we have the style. And this is how the button looks. There are 4 different selections. 3D sharp is the default. You can kind of see how it looks. It gives a little bit of a beveled look to the edges. If we select 3D soft, it kind of softens up those rough lines. OS-like is by far the most versatile. This changes depending on what operating system you're running on. For example, if this was in Windows XP, the button would look more like the OK or cancel buttons from the Windows XP dialogues instead of what they look like inside of Windows 7. And then we have standard, which is a very basic, simple button. For us, I'm going to set it to OS-like. We have a background color which is disabled for OS-like, but if we select any of the others, for example, standard, we are now able to select what color we want for the button. And then we have an alignment, which is how we want the text to show up on the button. I'm going to set mine back to OS-like. Then below we have fonts, then an image, which allows us to point to an image file to display on the button. This is helpful, for example, if you create multi-language and you want to use flags for the buttons. You can simply drop an image onto the button and you're all set. Additionally, you could drop an image down and add command animation, and we'll see that used in another video. Then we have the file path, the size, the position, if it's offset, what color would be transparent. Again, this can be a tag, so we can set the path, the file name, or both dynamically using a tag at runtime. Then we have advanced, which gives us the multi-line, the wrap text, enable translation, the auto grayout, auto format, what the margin is on either side. Then we have command. When we click on this, it will add the command animation to this, because at this point, it's just the button object. There is no intelligence, no execution behind it. So as soon as we click on command, it now brings us to command. And if I drop this down, I can go back to button. If I click command, it'll bring me back here. And then if I click the back to button, it'll bring me back to the button settings as well. And then on the command dialog, we have the type, which is built-in language, VB script, open screen, close screen, and then the tag functions. So for example, built-in language gives us, essentially it looks like a worksheet. We can put a tag in here and an expression that will execute and then write the value to that tag. And when we cover scripting, we'll go into more depth exactly how this can be used. And then VB script. If you've used Visual Basic or VB script inside of Excel or any other Microsoft application, this will be very similar. And once again, in another video, we will cover script more in depth. Then we have the open and close screen, which you simply put in a screen name, or you can browse and select a screen. And then when the button is pressed, it will either open or close that screen that is entered in here. Then we have the tag function, set, reset, and toggle. By simply putting a tag in here, it will run one of these commands, either set or reset, which means set it to 0 or 1, and toggle will invert the value between 0 and 1. Additionally, you can also put an integer or real tag in here. Now, what it will do is it will set that integer or real tag to 0 or to 1. It won't toggle between 55 and -40. It will simply toggle or set or reset. So for us, we're going to leave it at toggle tag. We're going to click on the browse button to bring up the object finder. We're going to select list. Under member, select the user enable and click OK, and then OK. And now we have it listed in the toggle tag. Additionally, if you need more room for scripting, if you click on Config, it will now bring up an expandable window that gives us additional room. For example, if we wanted to use VB script, then it gives some additional options at the bottom to enable focus, force, which we've seen these two before, require confirmation and e-sign, beep. When the button is pressed, an audible beep will come from the PC, and this could be just the buzzer that's on the main board if there is one. And release. When this box is checked, the on-up event is executed when you drag the cursor or your finger out of the object area, whether the button was released or not. This option is useful to make sure that the on-up event will always be executed after an on-down. So by default in Windows, if we click OK, but I do not release on the button, if I come up and then release, it ignores that click. That's the same for the on-down, which is this option here. Now, if we have release checked, if we had something configured for on-up, if I click, come off, and release, it will still execute that on-up script. Then we have key only, which means whatever we have configured over here is the only way to execute that button. Meaning that with that box checked, no user intervention through the user interface, through the GUI is capable. You simply have to hit the keystroke in order to execute the button. Then we have the disable field and the security setting. Then at the top, I briefly touched on this a second ago, we have our different execution conditions. On down, on while, and on up are the three basic, meaning that when the button is pushed down, execute this code. While the button is being pushed down, execute this code. So for example, this would be if you want to use a jog. You would simply have a variable equal the variable plus 1. Then on up, when the button is released, execute this code. On down is usually considered a negative transition. On while would be a jog. On up, positive transition. Then we have the same option for on right down and on right up. And this is if you're using a mouse and you right click on the button. When you right click down, it can execute. When you right click and release, it will execute. Then we have on double click. And then we come to the legacy options, the on touch. And this is for older applications. It requires using a function to execute these conditions. And you see that there's a subroutine right here with arguments that you have to pass to it. They can be used. It is a little tricky to get them to work sometimes. I typically do not advise using these unless it's absolutely necessary. But we have on touch start, meaning when the touch is started. And then on delta, meaning if the touch changed. And then on touch completed when touch is released. So what I will do is I will cancel out of this and come back to the normal object properties. And you see when I navigate away from on down, which has something entered here, I get an asterisk on there. That tells you that there is code or a tag configured for that type of execution. So you can quickly look at the command animation and say, what do I have firing when? So we're going to leave this as our only configuration. I'm going to click out of here. Then I'm going to copy this button, open the properties, and now I'm going to change this from user enable to control enable. Go back to the button, change it there as well. And now I have my two buttons that will toggle that. So I will save. I'll snap the development back to the left. And we see now I have my two buttons where I can toggle whether the user or control are enabled or disabled. So we've now looked at all of the available active objects in Blue Open Studio, but there's still one thing that we need to configure in our application, and that is the navigation buttons for going between screens. So I will bring up my navigation screen. I'll go to Graphics. I'll select Button. Click and drag it down onto the screen. Double click to open the properties. And this one will be for the main screen. So I'll change the caption to main. We'll go into Command. And on down, I will change the type to open screen. And I will click on the Browse button. On the Browse dialog, I will select main.scc. And now I have that one configured. We'll close out. We'll copy this. Change the type to VB script. I'll go to on up. I'll use the built-in function to open the screen. And if I hit the $, which is what Blue Open Studio uses to signify that a function or a tag will now be entered in, it brings up the IntelliSense or autofill dialog. And I will type open. You see that it shows up there. If I know it's a function, so if I enter in a open parenthesis, it will give me a tooltip with all the arguments required for that function. And we will cover what these arguments mean and how you can find out what they are and what needs to go in for these when we cover scripting in another video. But for now, I'm going to enter in the screen name, and I want to enter in text because I could also put a tag in here and dynamically change what screen I want this command to open or close. So I'm going to put it into quotes, and it will be active objects. And if you ever want to check if your VB script is correct, just right click and select check script. We'll then come up and either tell you if there's an error or if it's okay. Now we'll go back to button and change the caption to active objects. Now I have my two buttons configured. I will stop my runtime. I will save. Close both of my screens. Start up the runtime again. You see now my navigation on the left-hand side has my two buttons. Now I can navigate between the two screens that I've created. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact ProFace America Technical Support by phone at 1-800-289-9266, option 2, or by email, support@profaceamerica.com. You can also visit our website, profaceamerica.com, for manuals, drivers, product FAQs, and other product and software information. Thanks again, and have a great day.